Well, same, like a good morning, good afternoon, good evening to all of you as well. I'm sitting here in the Netherlands. That's where the Faculty of Geoinformation Science and Earth Observation of the University of Twente is located. And I would like to thank the organizers for inviting me here today to talk about what I like a lot is ecosystem services and landscapes. So I'll take you on the right now. Let me start. Okay, see that's working, right? So landscapes. So when we talk about landscapes, as we know, they are changing continuously because they are being shaped by us people and are being shaped about through nature. And with landscape approaches, that is those interactions between people and nature, that's exactly something that we would like to address and like to influence. Personally, I find the concept of ecosystem services extremely useful to describe those interdependencies between nature and people as like, wait a sec, I'm just trying to navigate here. This is, I don't think things are moving for you, right?
No, they're not.
Okay, now there is something moving. Okay,
Yes.
good, figured it out, thanks. So like I said, so I find the ecosystem services extremely useful to describe these human-nature relationships, and especially in rural landscapes, you can think of ecosystem services directly influencing people's well-being, or you can think of ecosystem services having a link to markets and as such influencing people's well-being, and of course ecosystem services. There's a continuous interaction between those benefits from nature and agriculture, and agriculture influencing nature again. So to me, ecosystem services, they tell me a story about what is happening in a landscape. And that's the reason why for many, many years now, I've been working on putting ecosystem services on the map, quite literally, and writing about them. And I realized that for many years now, I have a favorite sentence of closing a paper. I typically say something along the lines of like, hey, look at these very cool maps that I made because they will support integrated management of areas. Okay, and of course, maps, they can contribute to the sustainable management of multifunctional landscapes. They can do this in an assessment phase, or they can be used as a canvas to plan for action, and they can guide implementation. But that's not just any map that can do that, only if a map is useful. And I believe that is actually something that our community has achieved now. We are much more aware of like what aspects and what views we should put on the map and how. And by doing that, we can create those user-relevant, robust, and transparent maps of an area. But so once you've done that, you've checked all your boxes, you went through the whole interactive, iterative process of making those maps, and you come out, and now you have it. Then you have made that stellar map that is capturing your landscape. That map that you have created now, does it have an expiration date? What moment does a map that you have created represent? So like in other words, and that's why I like this picture, like how long is now? Because I found this message on a building in Berlin, and it made me think about time and the expiration date of maps. And that's actually something that I want to talk about here during this webinar. I would like to zoom into two time aspects of ecosystem service information in the context of integrated landscape management. I will specifically talk about time and timing of the spatial analysis of ecosystem services. Let me start with time. So when we want to make statements about trends, about changes of ecosystem services and landscapes, for instance, to describe the impacts of area management, then we want to have maps with an expiration date, a map that maps that clearly depict a certain moment in time to compare these situations. And that is actually something that, so maps with expiration dates, that is something that we quite often want to have. I'm going to give you an example of the IPBES assessment that was actually all about change, the IPBES assessment on land degradation and restoration. In this assessment, we looked at land degradation, the loss of ecosystem services, but also at landscape restoration, the increase of ecosystem services after an action. But that loss of ecosystem services, landscape degradation, it's a loss compared to what? So is that a loss compared to yesterday, a loss compared to the situation, the start of the Industrial Revolution, for example, or is it compared to the situation before humans were even present on Earth? That reference point is of course key when you're talking about a loss or an improvement, because, and it was also something that was heavily discussed in this IPBES process, because by defining that time aspect, it will also define our perception of land degradation and influencing what is causing land degradation. And it will as such guide our policy and action. And then it's of course the same for landscape restoration. If we want to improve ecosystem services in a landscape, what are we aiming for? What is our goal? What is the time period we're talking about? I showed you that map just when I started talking about this IPBES assessment. And this map shows the loss of soil organic carbon throughout landscapes over the world, but it's compared to the original natural state. So an assessment of the soil organic carbon before human presence. This of course gives an idea of the impact that people have had, but it's not relevant for decision making on any level. And that is actually my first point that I want to make. So if we are talking about temporal information of ecosystem services and landscapes, to make statements about trends and do assessments about impact, we need to those maps need to capture action or policy relevant moments to be able to take action. So changes are important. We want to capture those changes over time. But how are we currently keeping track of changes? How do we collect information over time to inform statements about trends and about impacts in landscapes? I'll give you a quick overview. So ecosystem service changes, they can be captured in a people-driven way or to technology-driven ways. If you're in the field, you can start, a people-driven way would be, for instance, through fact sheets or participatory mapping to capture people's perspective on change. You could, a bit more, you can combine technology with people views by, for instance, working with citizens, using small tools like cameras and doing repeated measurements in the fields. Or or you can go to a fully technological way and installing small sensors in the field that keep track of changes over time. Capturing time can also be done, like not in the field, but it could also be done through the internet, and that's also something that is being done currently. And that is by using social media, people try to capture changes in preference, human preferences of landscape users, or in behavior. And a third level of capturing time, of monitoring changes, could be, so not from the field, not through the internet, but actually from space. And here, of course, it would be a fully technological way of capturing changes, for instance, using satellite remote sensing to capture greenness changes over time, or the temperature temperature changes in an area. So capturing time, capturing changes in ecosystem services and landscapes can be tech-driven, it can be people-driven, it can be so it can range from engaging approaches to more objective approaches, from holistic to precise, and monitoring and technologies will have challenges regarding feasibility, skill sets, and resources. And that is something that most of us will know, is that there is probably not a best monitoring technique to capture ecosystem services at the moment. And because it depends on time, it depends on the area of interest, and often a combination of those different monitoring techniques is needed to get that full picture. There's one thing that these approaches have in common. They all the information on ecosystem services that they will gather will be prone to bias and error. We will never be able to do it completely right. And that is something that is important to realize when we're talking about time and talking about change, because if we want to make a statement on how a landscape is changing, we have to be aware that there is bias and there is error in our information. So if you spot a difference between different moments in time, for instance, looking at these two pictures here, T1 being first moment in time, T2 the second moment in time. So the difference that you spot, it could be indeed that that your tree has started to produce fruits, but it could also be part of a misclassification or a error, like the cat is actually a dog. So the difference that you're seeing, is it change or is it error? And I believe that that our community can address this by doing a better job in storing and sharing ecosystem service observation that include uncertainty statements, because in such a way we can actually learn better about the information we're having and making statements about change. This is what I wanted to say about capturing time. Now I would like to move to what I mean with ecosystem service changes and timing. Because our landscapes, it's not, oh, that's a pity, it's not moving. Our landscapes do not only change between years, they also change within a year. And I see that at the moment the animation is not running, but what you could see here is you could see the changes in primary production throughout the globe, showing that nature has a heartbeat, that you will continuously have growing seasons that they are changing throughout the year, because an ecosystem service supply will change within a year. And that means that it will probably matter if I take my ecosystem service assessment in the summer, in the winter, in the dry or in the wet season. So how can we capture the variation that we are seeing within our landscapes? And how should we then use that information when we want to learn about changes in a landscape? And for that, even more information is needed, not only between years, but also within 1 year. And there is one tool that is typically used for doing this, for having continuous observations of the Earth, and that are the satellites. We have many satellites orbiting the Earth at the moment that are continuously keeping track of the surface of the Earth. And perhaps for the geeks out there, yesterday, 5,699 satellites were orbiting the Earth, including many of those Earth observation satellites. But the point is that there are not only many satellites out there, they also pass over areas on all over the world, and they will do that quite often. The Sentinel satellites that I use in my research, they, for instance, pass by a location every 5 days. And as such, they provide a continuous flow and a standardized flow of information to people. Satellites will look at the Earth always in the same way. And so if we're thinking about remote sensing and about ecosystem services, we are seeing that that remote sensing information is because more and higher resolution images are becoming available, they're also now being used more and more in ecosystem service assessments. And especially the information that comes from satellites that says something about vegetation, about water, about temperature. These are the information, the indices that are being used most often. But the big question here is, of course, sure, a satellite passes over the Earth and it's collecting reflectance information and it's creating an index, but how does that index, how does that number relate to the ecosystem services, nature's benefits to people on the ground? And that is the big question, of course, and that is something that, to be able to use remote sensing information, that needs to be solved first. And for that, to be able to establish that link, you need a step of calibration. You need field data that tell you something about the ecosystem services on the ground, and link those to the remote sensing observations. So here, these are pictures that I took in South Africa. This is a rural dryland area that is managed to improve its multifunctionality. And so what we're doing here is we are checking in the lands, we're checking a range of ecosystem services on the ground to be able to link those to those satellites numbers, so to say. And so that's something that then needs to be done. That's the step that needs to be done. So you have your ecosystem service information from the ground, and then you can start testing a lot of these a lot of those remote sensing indices, trying to understand which one of those information sources best describes the ecosystem services that you have found on the ground. And the key point here is, of course, to find out what you can describe with remote sensing information and what we miss, what kind of information needs to be added to it to get the full picture. And that is the next point that I want to make to you, because I believe I would like to see a way more systematic testing of diverse remote sensing indices in combination with other resources to learn better how remote sensing captures ecosystem service supply and demand, and to learn what we are missing. In the example that I will give you here, it's we managed to build a model with remote sensing information that describes these two ecosystem services, erosion control and forage provision, fairly well. And what can we do? So if we have that frequent remote sensing information that can be linked, in this case, to erosion control, the ecosystem service erosion control in that area in South Africa, what can we do with it? Now, I believe that it's extremely useful to see what the rhythm is, that interannual change of the ecosystem services within a landscape. Because, so here, this is a timeline of 2 years that you're seeing on this graph now, from January 2017 till December 2018. You can see for 5 different areas how erosion control has been changing over time, what the rhythm was of that ecosystem service. And why is that important? Because erosion control is needed when your rains are coming, when your rains are falling. So is the ecosystem service erosion control following the same rhythm as the rainfall? And here you can see that it changes for the different areas. And important to realize is that if we would have made an average over the full year, that's what I'm putting here next to the graph, you can see that these averages show a very different picture. So if we want to make statements about the benefits of ecosystem services, it's important to look at this rhythm, to look at these differences over time, especially as they differ from average numbers. So while we like to aggregate our lives in years, most of the information we typically provide is some averages per year. It is important to account for those fluctuations that are happening within a year, especially when we're talking about ecosystem services that cannot be stored, that you need to benefit from straight away to be able to improve your well-being. Because people and nature, we change within a year. And here on this graph, I show I'm showing you a blue and a purple line of, in this case, these are kudus, iconic species in that area in South Africa. And what you're seeing here is in blue and in purple, the dry matter intake they are having throughout the year. And you can see that for female kudus, that changes based on the moment that they are feeding or are pregnant or having calves. So their intake changes. And if we're looking at the biomass supply, what kind of rhythm is the biomass following in that area? So here again, this is an example of where the rhythm and the timing of ecosystem services is relevant, as it says something about how well our needs are met. So that's the last point I want to make here today, is that we need to find the right metrics about this rhythm and timing, the changes within a year, to say something about success or say something about benefits, because having that information can help us to manage and to plan for change, and to slowly move towards managing for resilience. This is what I wanted to say to you today. So I wanted to tell you a bit more about time and timing. And I actually would like to continue writing that favorite sentence that I showed you in the beginning, that I would like to keep saying that the maps that I'm making will contribute to the strengthening of sustainable and multifunctional landscapes. But I believe that I can only write that sentence if I and also the ecosystem service community will do a better job in dealing with time. And I believe that needs to be done by capturing those relevant moments in time, to be able to make statements on trends, to give warnings, to learn from successes, and to support scenario modeling. Second, by having fair, diverse spatial information that allows for comparison over time, because we need diverse monitoring information. There is no size fits all, but that monitoring information is currently scattered and poorly documented. So I would love to see this real effort in which we store our ecosystem service observations in a findable, accessible, reusable way. That's what FAIR stands for. At the moment, the environmental accounting community and the global assessment initiatives have started, and I hope they will set the tone for this type of work. As a third point, like I said, the satellite information is frequent, it's standardized, and it's globally available, but we need to do systematic testing of these of diverse remote sensing indices to understand better how well they capture ecosystem service supply and demands, and to better know what we are missing if we're using remote sensing information. And as a last point here, to repeat the presentation, is like that fourth point is about nature and people are changing also within a year. So when we want to manage and plan for sustainable management, we need to be able to describe those rhythms and that timing to explore for the right alignment. For that, we need measures to capture that variation, that rhythm. Those 4 points, those 4 points that I brought up during the presentation, to be able to get there, that's not something we can do alone. Obviously, for that, partnerships or alliances are needed. They are needed to share information, to share experiences, or to look at this subject from diverse angles, and of course, to join forces. Because I actually believe that together we can make this work, and I would say it's about time. Thank you very much for your attention, and curious to hear your thoughts and have a bit of discussion about this.